This is a lecture about the age of realism and naturalism, which lasted between approximately 1832 and 1900. In England, around the 1900s, the technical and economic development created great wealth for few and great poverty for the many. Social problems such as lack of housing, illiteracy, infant mortality, child abuse, and crime among the people were very common. There was a huge growth in literature, and libraries became important for the poorer people. And the novel became the most important and popular literary form, and the stories written during this time described society and people's lives in great detail, also known as realism. Charles Dickens is, of course, one of the most famous authors from this period of time, and he wrote about a social concern with the problems of the society at the time, meaning poverty and working conditions. He knew what he was writing about because as a 12-year-old he had worked 12 hours a day for money that wasn't enough to get him food. And his main themes in his writings were sufferings of children and the stories of victims. Famous works by Charles Dickens was Oliver Twist, Nicholas Nickleby, Great Expectations, and A Christmas Carol. And there's an extract from Oliver Twist in your textbook. Charlotte Brontë is another famous author. Her most famous writing is Jane Eyre, which is about a poor child without parents who go through many sufferings, and in her writing she depicts the circumstances of women. Charlotte Brontë was very heavily influenced by the Romantic poets, and in this folder there's an extract from Jane Eyre that you are to read. Oscar Wilde is Ireland's most famous author from this period. He was a proficient and versatile writer, but he only wrote one novel during his lifetime, The Picture of Dorian Gray, and that was published in 1891. He was, along as a writer, also a playwright. He was regarded as one of the greatest playwrights of the Victorian era. He wrote and produced 9 plays during his lifetime. America around the 1900s, many writers were influenced by what they saw in real life, such as poor people, the misery of slavery, and also the effects of the Industrial Revolution. The literary term for this is realism, which means that you describe everything you see as accurately as possible. At the end of the 19th century, gender inequality was very obvious in the US. Women didn't have the right to vote, and they were not allowed to testify in court or attend a higher education. They also had very limited control over personal property after marriage. And suffrage societies claiming the right to vote began to form throughout the country, and these societies were often inspired by women writers. And they were successful because women in the US won the right to vote in 1920. Emily Dickinson is one of the female authors from America during this time. She only published 6 poems during her lifetime, but she's said to have written more than 1,700 poems. She was very fascinated with death, but also wrote about completely ordinary things. And she is one of the most read and talked about American 19th century poets. Mark Twain, also known as Samuel Langhorne Clemens, is another one of the famous American authors. He worked as a journalist, but he also had experience as a pilot on the Mississippi River. And his most famous works are The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which is about a boy and a slave who run on the run who sail south on a raft, and also, of course, Tom Sawyer. And there is an extract from The Adventures of Tom Sawyer in your textbook. Walt Whitman is another famous American name. He had many different jobs. He worked as a printer, teacher, and a journalist. He is best known for Leaves of Grass, which is 12 long poems that deal with freedom and brotherhood. He is considered to be very modern at the time because of the content of his poems, but also because the free verse form, ignoring the traditional rules of rhyme and rhythm. And you can listen to I Hear America Singing in your textbook on page 57. Chopin is considered at later years as one of the most famous American short story writers. She wrote her first story in 1869. She had lost many of her loved ones at an early age, and before she was 15, she had lost her father, her great-grandmother, and her half-brother. The first story that she wrote was never published, but she still tried to make a living as a writer when she became a widow. She wrote many short stories, around 100 short stories, and 2 novels were written during the 1890s. Her stories are set mostly in Louisiana, and she's appreciated for her graceful, poetic descriptions of sensitive and intelligent women's lives. She's a good example of an American realist, someone trying to represent life the way it actually was lived. Chopin died in 1904, but she didn't become popular and known worldwide until the late 1960s, when several biographies about her had been published. And in the folder, you can find the story of an hour.